All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this Stickybeak webinar on how not to fail in the US, particularly for FMCG and CPG brands eyeing up the opportunity that is the United States. So I'm Anna Henwood. It's great to have you here with us, whether that's from New Zealand, Australia, UK, or anywhere around the world. If you're a founder, an export lead, or a marketer, you already know that expanding into the US isn't that simple. It's not as simple as sort of, let's do what I do at home and make it bigger. It's actually a lot more complex, which is why I've got this amazing panel of experts with me today to help you understand how to best enter the market and what to think about. So first up, we'll hear from Nicola O'Rourke. She's a CPG expert. She's on my speed dial about everything, the USA and marketing and brand and export. I'll then jump in with some thoughts about consumer testing and some ways that you can get feedback from that audience in the US to make better decisions. After that, Scott, who's from Tag CPG, he's our go-to expert on navigating compliance, logistics, and building your operations on US soil. So he'll go through lots of that detail for you. And then last but not least, and probably why you're all here, we've got the expert on US tariffs, Mario, here to help you sort of understand what's going on. I don't know if anyone can predict what's going to happen next, but at least we can start to understand what is going on and a little bit of the why. So he'll take us through that as well. And if you've got any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat as we go. I'll keep an eye on them and we'll bring them to the team at the end if there are any. So that's the lineup. It's 50 minutes of practical advice, hopefully a few aha moments in there for you too. So to start us off, I'll hand over to you, Nicola.
Awesome. Thanks, Anna. I'll just share my screen. You just tell me when it's good to go. Hopefully you can all see that.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Oh, awesome. The US market is one of the world's most competitive CPG markets. It's really dynamic, alive with competition, hyper-segmented, and has the ability to do great things for businesses who approach that market well. I work with loads of businesses who are scaling in the US and have scaled some brands there myself. And today's lessons are from experience in operating in the market and what to know before you go. If you want more information or have a deeper conversation about the US, just reach out on LinkedIn and these slides will be posted and available after the webinar. So I'm just going to cover a couple of fundamental points over these slides. So you can jump in and ask questions on the chat at any time and we'll hopefully get to cover any of those at the end. First up is really your market analysis, and kind of re-engineering your value proposition for the market is really critical because, as Anna said, what works for your brand in your home market won't necessarily probably at all be the same for US consumers. US consumers are different. In less populated countries like Australia and New Zealand, you have to often be a bit of a generalist. Your product offer, in order to scale, needs to fit into many channels and many customer needs. However, in the US, due to its sheer population size, demographics, lifestyle, and consumer behaviours, there are hyper niches in the market that can be served and who could still be millions and millions of consumers. You have to be able to work through a value proposition funnel to define how you are relevant, how you're unique, and solving a problem for both US customers and consumers. But where do you go to find some of this information? None of us have the budgets necessarily to be going and doing big market studies. Some of my go-tos to build out market analysis are just spending time on the retailer online stores. Instacart's a great source of information. Whole Foods, Walmart, Costco, Amazon, all the other retailer online stores. Scrapely, scraping data, ChatGPT, NZTE and other Australian export government support services give you great templates and access to a whole lot of information that can allow you to build out your value proposition and market analysis for the US. The commercials are the next most critical thing to get right. Your margin tree into the market will decide whether you can build a scalable, profitable business in the US. When you start out, this is often how you think the route to market happens, certainly how I did, with maybe one or two importers or distributors in the mix, minimal margin erosion points before you end up on shelf, and a price point on shelf that you think is going to be pretty competitive with other products. However, the reality of getting to market is totally different. Due to the geographic size, diverse channels, chilled, ambient, frozen supply chains, different state legislations and regulations. The supply chain and margin tree from your warehouse to consumers is significantly different and has a lot more clicks in the process that can erode profit and value. Across the network of importer requirements, duties, 3PL warehouse, distributor warehouses, retailer warehouses, and in-store requirements, the margin tree into US consumers can be quite challenging. And e-commerce such as Amazon isn't substantially different. You just can get your cash a little bit faster. I've got a number of commercial margin tree templates that I'm happy to share post the call if people want to reach out. But this is a critical part in getting your business case to know whether your product can get to shelf for the price that actually will move volume and meet your value proposition expectations. The next one's focus. The US is a huge market, and the number of companies I have saying, I'm going to the USA, but can't define what zip code, where their consumers are, why they're choosing location, means they're bound to lose loads of money in the process. The channels in the US market are diverse, and to build a really viable business, you have to actually start by picking a very small focused area of the market, one that ideally aligns with your consumer or customer needs. So pick a zip code and then look at how you might own it, one that's got a concentration of your customer base. For example, in Texas alone, there are 5 of the top 10 most populated zip codes with over 100,000 people. That's most New Zealand towns. So there are lots of opportunities to be very, very targeted in how you might access markets, especially when you think about that through the lens of your customers and consumers. Applying a well-known where to play and how to win strategy is a great template to use to build out your market testing priorities. Once you've identified your area of focus, building out your testing and learning strategy is critical. The US has so many retailers, over 60,000, that are specific to different states, different channels, and different needs, not to mention all of the food service opportunities in the market. I've worked with businesses that have built out very viable businesses just on servicing army contracts or university contracts in the US. There are many, many different channels and routes to market for your products. So build out your testing strategy. What price points and promotional mechanics are going to work? Are my margins what I thought they were going to be? How quickly do I need to replenish my supply chain? What trade marketing mechanics are working for me? What is the true cost of my promotions? Building out all of that information and testing on a small scale, somewhere in the market via very small retailer chains or very small geo-targeted digital activity is the quickest and easiest way to get market feedback and make sure that you are scaling without a significant cost of capital. Many of you have probably heard this before, but one of my favorite Whole Foods sayings is you live or die by the last 18 inches. That's that moment that you get consumers to grab a product off the shelf. Getting that product on shelf isn't always easy, but it is the start. But growing that velocity and getting sales is the challenging part. Before you go, you have to ensure that you've tested your packaging proposition with US consumers and also in the wild on shelf in the competitive environment. Your product on a Walmart shelf versus a Whole Foods shelf versus a Central Market shelf or a Bristol Farms or a CVS is going to look totally different depending on the competitor set in the market. US consumers use logo marks and verification marks to shop propositions. You may not like including these on your packaging, but a lot of the time it's critical and it's the reality of how consumers make purchase decisions. You can see here a Lewis Road example on how the packaging evolved in the first 6 months of that product being on shelf in the market. Dialing up different things like grass-fed, New Zealand, adding the non-GMO certification, improving little cues that are going to make it a whole lot easier for the shopper to make a quick decision when they are for 3 seconds scanning a butter shelf. If only we'd had Stickybeak back then to do some of that testing for us as opposed to testing and learning in the market. But the great thing about the US market is you have more access to data on your retailer performance than you do in any other market. The distributor portals, the retailer portals are updated weekly and they give you real-time information on stores and replenishment rates. To the right there, you can see what some of the Whole Foods portal data looks like. You have the ability to really understand how you're performing across all of your stores if you're looking at that frequently and make really good, quick decisions around how you adjust your promotional plans in the market. you're spending US dollars on a New Zealand or Australia dollar. So sometimes, the cost of capital is pretty rough in the market. You have to really be aware of the cost it's going to take to not only get ready to enter the market, but actually trade in the market. If you're doing a 50 cents off a pack US, that's going to cost you almost $1.20 to $1.30 New Zealand by the time you fund that back. So the costs you don't see, like slotting fees, distributor costs, broker costs, ullage, waste, service fees, tariffs, legal fees, all that stuff can really layer into the cost of your products. And the retailer timelines can be long. It can be 12 to 18 months before you get the chance to present. And sometimes from a yes to being on shelf can still take another 6 months. So you really need to think quite carefully about your cash cycle. In the early days when you're first hitting shelves or you're on your first 1,000 stores, it can take 4 to 6 months after your first sale before you can return any cash. That's a long time if you've also got product on the water being shipped to market. You have to really think quite carefully about how long you're prepared to wait before you get payback on the market or it breaks even for you. And lastly, the legal stuff. The US is one of the most litigious markets in the world. It's not a she'll be right attitude that you should take to this market in the context of legal. Now, that's not necessarily all of the market setup in terms of your entities in the market. That can be as simple as things like your packaging, your claims. And there are multiple areas that you should consider looking at before you go to market. There are resources such as Registrar Corp for labelling, claims and packaging that I highly recommend to get and assess your claims and packaging before you hit the market. You can be asked for a cease and desist for things as simple as your trade dress, which is the colour of your packaging. There are multiple areas you have to consider, not just your trademarks and your brand. The FDA standards review process may offer other sources you can access to check before you go. You need to consider things like your product recall processes and how you're going to address that through your supply chain. There's a number of brand examples I've seen. For example, one brand was on shelf for 30 days in only 15 stores and had a cease and desist, which cost them about $50,000, and they had to change their packaging. Another brand had claims on their packaging that cost them about $40,000 to fix, just simply because of the way they had worded claims around the wellbeing benefits of their product. And another brand had website privacy and policy claims that were inaccurate for the market. So a lot of us don't even think about the website requirements for the market we're in, but that costs about $15K to fix. So there are a small amount of investment up front to work through, making sure that you have got your level of risk applied to your claims and legal things before you hit the market is critical. But in short, the US is an exciting and dynamic market. Businesses can find niches to exploit for success, especially in the natural wellness and value-add markets. However, doing your homework and understanding the market is critical to not lose a significant amount of money on the way through. Don't forget, you can't beat boots on the ground to get to the market, visit often, meet customers and consumers on their turf. Thanks, Anna. I'll pass over to you to take us through some of the amazing work that I think Stickybeak can do to help brands when accessing the market.
Awesome. Thanks, Nicola. That's perfect. Well, there's lots to think about, and luckily we've also got some more experts coming up that'll help you kind of understand some of those areas that Nicola touched on a bit more. I'm going to help you, hopefully, understand a bit more about how consumer testing can make it a bit easier to navigate your way through some of those decisions that Nicola was talking about. So as I mentioned, I'm Anna Henwood. I'm the CEO at Stickybeak, but I'm really a marketer at heart, and have been a global CMO and brand manager, and worked in international marketing for most of my career. So I've made many of the mistakes that Nicola's talked about, which is a bit of the why of Stickybeak. We're a platform that helps you make better marketing and product decisions. And we do that by getting you honest, real feedback from your consumer. And it's anywhere in the world. And we've got a little caveat on that because there's some countries like Syria that just really hard to find people on research panels and social media, but basically everywhere. We can get you that feedback in as quick as 48 hours, often less than 24 in a market like the States. And we're doing it without blowing the budget. So particularly today, we're talking about de-risking your US launch. And I want to just walk you through how you might do that with consumer testing, including some examples from customers that we've worked with. So we'll just do a really quick overview of market versus marketing research, how that ties into consumer testing, and then we'll go through some of those examples. Okay, so Nicola spoke in her presentation about, lots of research and insights that you need to get before you go. And I tend to think of those in two buckets: market research and marketing research. So market research is that strategic stuff. It's about sizing up the market. It's knowing which zip codes. It's understanding that segmentation and the target market and the demand that might be there. It, goes into pricing and competitors and all those sort of deep dive things that you want to do before you make the call to go into that market. Marketing research is about then understanding how to best enter that market. So which products and concepts might you test, what the claims are, what the pack design looks like, getting into campaigns, maybe even brand repositioning, depending on your journey of how you want the US to shape up to be part of your market, your core markets. So marketing research is more about that go-to-market side of things, and typically where we see falls into the FMCG brand manager or senior brand manager's role. And that's where Stickybeak comes in. So consumer testing is one of the hows of marketing research. If you've heard words like primary research and secondary research, consumer testing is a primary research method. It's all about your research and talking to your consumers. But it can be qualitative and quantitative. So that means that you can, obviously it's all about getting numbers and data points, but it's also about getting some verbatim feedback. Because marketing is very much about the art and the science. So understanding a bit of the what and the why is really critical when you're making decisions. So think about consumer testing helping you answer pack designs, claims, price points, and getting some validation on your gut and testing your guess. So when you think about market localization, it can span all of your marketing program. So you might have already developed a brand and you might want to take that brand into the US as it is. So when you're doing something like that, you might want to look at how it sits alongside the competition. So you can really understand which parts of your brand proposition you want to dial up and which really resonate with the local consumer there. You might reposition your brand completely to focus in on that market if the US is going to be your kind of hero and go-to market. From a product side, really think about getting feedback early and often. So right from deciding which products that you might lead with in the market, and then the variations of those products, flavor profiles are different, pack formats and sizes are different. So really understand sort of which best version of your product that you can take to the US. And then on the campaign side, it's not just language, this is really about understanding the motivations, the drivers, the imagery, the identity that will attract the target market in your new market. And if you only take one thing away from this part of the presentation, it's the idea of test early and often. And the saying we have here is it's all about the ingredients, not the cake. So what we mean is test all the individual components that might go into your final creative campaign or your final product design. Test early, test often, because the insights that you get along the way are so valuable for building into the next stage. I think about the idea of testing things to write my brief. So if I'm writing a brief to my packaging design agency, what insights, what data points can I put in there to really make sure that those first options are totally on point? Instead of getting all the way after hours and hours and thousands of dollars of iterations, maybe even falling in love with the final idea and then testing it and realizing that you're the only person in love with this idea. So test early, test often, and use that feedback as you develop your product and your marketing. Okay, there's a lot on the next few slides, and I'm not going to go through all the detail. And as Nicola said, they will be sent afterwards. But I just wanted to make sure that you had some information here on the different stages of testing and what you might test and why. Then I'll jump into those examples to try and bring that to life. So upfront, you might be sort of looking at your product market fit. What product, as I talked about, why, what are some of those key benefits that you can pull out? And so that could be through some rapid product concept testing. It could be diving deep on one idea and really understanding, well, where in the supermarket do they shop and how would they use it and how regularly? Then once you feel like you've got your sort of product set and offering nailed down a bit more, then you want to go into your localization. So what does need to change on pack? What key points and USPs of your brand do you want to bring forward that'll really be a point of difference, but still really resonate with your target audience in that new market? And then price testing and getting validation as well. Like as Nicola said, the margin tree is complicated and deep. So you need to make sure that you've got your price point at a place that is going to be, commercially viable for your business, but also competitive in the marketplace. And then once you're ready to launch, the testing doesn't stop. There's lots of, whether you've got listings on Amazon, whether it's retail media opportunities, you want to make sure that not just your pack, but anything else, your listings, everything else that you're putting around your brand and products is as on point as possible. So that can be imagery, it can be full concepts, it can be just key copy lines and headlines. What is it that you can highlight that'll put your product and your brand in the best light? And then, as we know from marketing, even though it feels really good when you hit launch and you you walk away from that campaign for a hot minute, there's plenty to do to optimize. So, you might want to start to understand your brand health in a market once you've been there for a while. So what's your awareness? What's your consideration? Who are you up against and what do their funnels look like compared to yours? Things like creative or post-campaign effectiveness, and start to understand the channels that might be resonating with people. So just quickly now jumping into some examples to bring this to life. So this is a really simple product test we did for a ready-to-eat Indian food brand entering the US market. They knew from other markets that their authenticity was a big sort of selling point and a reason people loved their product. But they also knew that naming the product needed to be able to be really easily understood. As we referred to those last 18 inches, if you don't actually understand what you're reading on pack, it's pretty hard to make that quick decision. So they did some rapid testing around a whole range of their products to understand which names, kind of which ingredients to pull in. If they were going to make these names a bit more westernized, how would they go about it? Is it by highlighting regions or ingredients or using sort of more familiar language around each of their product names? And so again, that gave them a really clear insight into which product names to go with, which then flowed through into their packaging design and so on. Another customer that we've worked with in the wine space actually we really sort of dug into pack format and claims. And so some of their earlier market research had pulled out this insight of sort of basements with storage and bigger fridges in the US compared to Australia and New Zealand. And so what did that mean for them entering the market, especially when there was some new categories like boxed wine that are having growth and maybe even wine in a can and what that looks like in terms of lots of 12 or 6 or how many that might be for storage. So using that insight, they actually ran a series of pack format and pack design tests to really understand what that might look like and to then further validate it with the claims and the messaging that they would pull through onto that pack. So another example of how it might be a core product that you're looking at, but how might you package it to work best for the US market? One now on brand. So I actually really love this one. It's a customer we worked with over a series of months, actually, as they did a great project repositioning their brand. So they'd had success in the market and they'd made the call that the US was going to be their #1 growth market and had a really tight profile on their target audience and who that was and how they shop. So they'd done their research and now they were getting into that repositioning stage for the brand. And so all the way from creative ideation through to tagline testing, product packaging concepts, all the way through to the actual final pack designs was what we tested on the journey with this brand, really stress testing all the decisions they were making around the brand as they went along. One of, I think, my favorite examples was there was a particular word in the tagline that someone in the board had had a little niggle about in terms of the double meaning that that word might have. And I'm sure all of you have had this experience where there's a voice in the room that is just not sure, and it could be a senior voice, and so you need to try and understand how you can sort of validate what you're doing and take that feedback on board and understand what to do with it. So they literally just tested that. They asked people what that word meant to them, and the feedback they got was definitely aligned with what they had thought. There was a very small percentage that also had the additional meaning from the word, but the vast majority took the proposition for what they had wanted it and positioned it to be. So it just took that kind of unease and uncertainty off, out of the boardroom, and allowed the marketing team to continue with that brand repositioning and development. And last one is actually a cleaning brand that we've been working with, without mentioning any brand names. It's a product that works without you needing to scrub a lot. And they knew that there was some consumer skepticism in this space, particularly indoors. So outdoors, it was relatively accepted from the research they'd done in the US, but indoors, it really needed to have a high amount of disinfectant, and you need to scrub for anything if it was going to actually clean your product. But they wanted to do a fun campaign that sort of pushed that thinking. And, maybe you would have time with kids instead of cleaning the shower, or maybe you would do some yoga instead of cleaning the shower. But the team really wanted to understand sort of how much they needed to explain and outline that campaign for it to land effectively. And then also which different imagery and things might appeal the most. So what are those activities that people would do rather than clean the shower? So again, focusing on their target market, they got some rapid feedback around the campaign. I think this one was turned around. We did about 3 tests back to back, and it was turned around in about 6 days, and it allowed them to get the campaign out the door with confidence. So that is a wrap on consumer testing. Again, if you remember one thing, consumer testing isn't a final check. Think of it as a creative tool. The brands that test early, they can move fast and they can waste less. All right, Scott, over to you. Oh, you might just need to unmute, Scott.
All right. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Great, great. My name is Scott Glassman. I'm managing partner of TAG CPG. We are a outsourced fractional supply chain operations firm for international brands looking to enter, operate, and/or scale in the US. And you'll see some common themes based on what Nicola and Anna mentioned, and it'll also lead into the tariff presentation that Mario will be addressing. So as I mentioned, we're an outsourced fractional operations supply chain firm. There's a couple different ways to go to market in the US. As Nicola mentioned, you can go the importer route, where you sell your product to an importer. The importer then controls your destiny, if you will, in the US market. Or you can go at it yourself and create your own business entity in the US, become your own importer of record, and create enterprise value for your brand as you grow. Again, this goes all back to what Nicola mentioned in her presentation, which is what is your strategy for the US and how are you going to enter the market? So if you're looking to enter the market directly, then you're going to need a team boots on the ground. And one of the common themes that you've been hearing and will continue to hear is there are resources, there are boots on the ground, there are New Zealand, Australian, UK brands that have done this in both ways. So you're not going to be the first company to enter the US market. So leverage your resources, leverage your network, obtain as much information as you can so you can make great decisions. Because as Nicola mentioned, just on the New Zealand currency exchange rate, this is an expensive proposition. It's also an expensive proposition once you get on the shelf and look at getting that velocity. So I'll go through some of the considerations of the back office, things to consider as you're thinking about your supply chain and operations. First one is regulatory and compliance. As Nicola mentioned, There are a number of agencies, groups that can help with ensuring that your I's are dotted, your T's are crossed, and your lowercase j's are dotted. One being the Foreign Supplier Verification Program, FSVP. That documentation you will have to have in place in bringing your products over. So when you send and ship your products over, it's going to enter into one of the U.S. ports and clear customs. That's when CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, reviews all the information. If there is an issue with your documentation, it could prevent your products from going forward outside of the port. We've had examples where brands have shipped over product. The paperwork and documentation isn't complete or thorough. The product gets stuck in customs, and then you have a choice to either bring it back, dispose, or destroy. And for one particular brand that we encountered, that wasn't a client of ours, but encountered, we've heard many of these stories where it's cost them upwards of $25,000, $30,000, $45,000 in that mistake. So documentation, documentation, documentation. You want to make sure all your certifications are in place as well. FDA, if it falls under USDA, ensuring that those are complete. You'll also want a FSVP agent and what they call a QI, a qualified individual. The qualified individual is the person that CBP will call if there's any issues with your products entering the US, especially if they have questions around FDA certifications and such. Now, one thing that is coming here in the next few years under FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, is really the traceability and record-keeping documentation for your products. So it's always changing. FSMA compliance has pushed to 2 years from now. So there's some traceability things that will happen in 2028, but things to be aware of. One of the things that Nicola mentioned that's important is and what we recommend is to have an attorney indemnify your labels. That will save you a number of issues in the event someone contests your labels or your product. If an attorney, U.S. attorney, identifies a label, they have to defend that indemnification, which then protects you and mitigates some of your risk. But happy to answer more questions as our seminar continues. The next piece, supply chain considerations. You're shipping product overseas to the US. Once you get on the shelf, or I should say, once you're authorized for the shelf, that's the easy part. The difficult part comes with getting the velocity off the shelf and then continuously supporting your business. And so demand planning, forecasting, ensuring that you have enough product and the timing of that product of getting from port of origin all the way through customs to your warehouse here in the US is a critical piece. And that impacts your production planning, your inventory management and control, and everything related to that. The other thing to think about is, where is your warehouse going to be in the US when you enter? Many brands don't know where their business is going to come from. So have some flexibility in the warehouse. And as a point of differentiation, which you may have experienced in other markets, which is different than the US, as Nicola mentioned in her map, is that you will need your own warehouse. A distributor for Whole Foods or Whole Foods won't take a container of your product. The distributor will purchase your product, but they're not going to take containers of your product. They're going to want you to ship your product from your warehouse. So it's a little bit different when we talk about distributors. The name is the same. The definition is a little different. And so a distributor is a critical partner in the US market and getting your products from warehouse to the retailer. And then we also recommend, when you're exporting your product, because you don't know where the sales are going to come from or the velocity of that, is to look at a plan that has you exporting the product for the first 12, 18, 24 months. There may be opportunities to onshore in the US using a co-manufacturer or co-packer, but once you have that fact-based data, it puts you in a better negotiating position with the co-manufacturers and co-packers. Logistics and transportation. kind of alluded to this in regulatory in compliance as it comes to importing your product into the US. A number of companies that we work with, they become their own importer of record. So that means they have a US entity with a US tax ID number. There are other clients that we work with that are an FIOR, a foreign importer of record, where you don't necessarily need to establish a US entity, but there are a number of other pieces of information that need to be completed and files that need to be submitted. And then the duties, tariffs, and tax considerations coming into the US, which Mario will touch upon on that piece. Overlooking logistics and supply chain planning, here's where we see a lot of challenges with brands coming into the United States. Underestimating the shipping costs and lead times. For example, it could be on the water for 30 days, could be on the water for 45 days. There can be an issue. We've had clients who have shipped ocean and they've shipped air. Sometimes shipping air, depending on how light your product is, may not be as cumbersome in costs, but again, want to mitigate the costs of shipping your products over to the US and have a contingency plan on that. Make sure you go with a reliable partner. Yes, it may cost a little bit more, but the peace of mind of ensuring that that partner is going to be able to get your products from port of origin all the way to the US is critical. You want to have transparency and traceability so you know where your products are at any given moment on that piece to ensure that it gets to your warehouse at the right time so you're able to fulfill the orders. The last position you want to be in is where you're short shipping and you just entered doing business with UNFI or KeHE that's then distributing to Sprouts or Whole Foods Market. So having that visibility and planning is a critical piece. And then Mario will touch on the HT codes, the harmonized tariff codes. One thing to think about on that is to ensure that the freight forwarder and anybody involved with those logistics has the right harmonized tariff code. An example I'll give is we're working with a non-dairy frozen dessert product. Before we were working with them, they set up in the United States. The harmonized tariff code they were using was for dairy ice cream. The harmonized tariff code for dairy ice cream is quite a bit different in duties and tariffs than the harmonized tariff code for non-dairy frozen dessert. So something just to make sure that you're double checking all the information and working with your strategic partners to ensure that that information is correct. Operational considerations. Usually we say, hey, we can solve problems before you even get up in the morning. But truly, if you're in New Zealand or Australia, or even the UK for that matter, you're ahead of the US time zones. But it's important to have boots on the ground that can work within the US time zones, whether you're managing your business from afar or you have strategic partners here in the United States. The order processing, order fulfillment, there are certain pieces that you'll need in doing business with some of the distributors and retailers, whether it be Walmart, Target, Whole Foods, Sprouts, and the distributors that support them, whether it's a KeHE or UNFI, or the myriad of other primary, secondary, tertiary folks that are involved in getting your products from the warehouse to the shelf. For example, EDI. Some folks require EDI, electronic data interchange. That's where they submit the purchase orders. You'll also want to make sure that as you're looking at warehouses in the United States, that those warehouses have a very user-friendly WMS, warehouse management systems, and portal in order for you to see what you have, where you have it, and be able to fill those products from the warehouse. And then operating in the US time zones. Can't stress that enough. I've seen on a couple of international brands that they're working US time zones from 3 a.m. to 10 a.m. Well, I can guarantee you that Whole Foods, Sprouts, UNFI, KeHE, and the other folks, they're not working between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. In answering or replying to emails. So it's important that you have someone on your team, if you're managing from afar, that you are operating within the US time zones. I think key takeaways and success strategies. Have a short, mid, and long-term strategy. Make sure you have that contingency plan. Again, if something goes wrong or if something goes very right, you may have anticipated that you're going to have a velocity of, you know, call it 2 or 3 pallets a week. But in essence, you've done such a great job on the sales and on building velocities that, it is over what you have forecasted. So ensure that you're planning correctly. And then in those events, then you want to make sure that if you do get into an issue, that you want to allocate your products to the right POs. So you don't want to lean too far over your skis, is what we say here in the U.S. Back to what Anna mentioned, there's a difference between market research and marketing research. Very important. Want to make sure that your product really fits the persona that you're going after in the US market, in addition to doing that market and channel research, as Nicola mentioned. Grocery, retail, food service, convenience, alternative channel, um, food service, e-commerce, and direct to consumer. So there's many different channels, and unlike UK, Australia, New Zealand, there are many different retailers, and especially independent markets in the US. And you want to make sure that in your strategy, as Nicola mentioned, look at certain geographic areas. Perfect example is we have conversations where brands might say, I want to be in 2,000 doors in 12 months. That's great, but that is setting yourself up for failure. There's a lot of money that entails in opening up new DCs. There's fees associated with it. You want to be very strategic. You want to be able to do your A/B testing. You want to have a profitable business. And this becomes a very expensive proposition in entering the US market. And we hate to see any brands uh, come up to that point where financially it's just too difficult and then you retreat from the market. We know as entrepreneurs and founders and so on and so forth that it takes a lot of time, resources, uh, a lot of sweat, equity, if you will, in building your company and building your brand. And we want to see you successful in entering this market because we know how expensive it is. That goes back to the measured growth and long-term planning. Play the long game. You're going to be easily pulled into opportunistic opportunities, and sometimes they may make sense. Other times, you don't want to always chase what we call the shiny penny. Stay focused on your strategy, continue to build and grow, and as you get that momentum, use that as the permission to continue to expand. And then the importance of the thorough preparation and adaptability. Be able to pivot, because as we all know, being brand owners, founders, export managers, our days are filled with pivoting. So no different when you're coming over to the US market on that piece. And a lot of the data that you will receive by working with some of these companies, like the Whole Foods portal or the UNFI, KeHE, or other distributor portals or retail portals, provides a lot of data for which you can then use for decision making. Well, that's a little bit of back of house considerations. I'm going to transition over to Mario, who will talk more about tariffs.
Thank you. My name is Mario Tarico. I'm a senior associate at Aaron Fox Schiff here in Washington, D.C. I primarily advise on customs issues, tariffs, country of origin, anything that kind of enters the U.S. market. I'm just confirming everyone can see my screen. Okay. So let's get into it. So I'll first sort of kind of tee up this presentation about things that everyone should be worried about. Not worried about, but concerned with if you're entering the US market. Scott in his presentation talked about the harmonized tariff schedule. And I think that's just a really good starting point for any company that's considering the US market, just because there's so many special duties now, especially with this new Trump presidency or administration, with the expansion of these different duties. And a lot of them hinge on the HTS code. And that's why it's so important to have it right, to determine whether you have the right HTS code, because that will make a difference between paying 25% duties or in some cases even 100%. The second main consideration I would say is to determine the country of origin of your product. A lot of times, this is where I see a lot of brands get in trouble because they'll have certain touch points, especially with China, where they'll have a complex supply chain and they're importing components or subcomponents from China and then exporting it. And for customs purposes, that can influence the country of origin. Just because you export it from New Zealand or Australia, that doesn't mean that's necessarily a country of origin of that product. And then also, if you're an importer of record, either a domestic or foreign importer of record, U.S. Customs expects every importer to exercise reasonable care, which means that you're doing your diligence before entering products into the U.S. market. And that really can encompass a lot of things, like consulting with your in-house experts about the right HTS code or the right country of origin or the right valuation of your product, or you looking online on customs rulings or reading CBP guidance to kind of guide you in your decision-making process to make sure that even if you got something wrong, you exercise reasonable care, which will mitigate or protect you from potential penalties, which could add up depending on the gravity of the situation. So moving on, this is an overview of the tariffs that we've seen either discussed or implemented to date. There's a lot that's going on right now in terms of trade in the U.S. market. I think the main one is this first category is the IEEPA duties. And I mention these is because it's a brand new authority, if you will, that President Trump has used to impose duties. This law in itself has an origin in imposing sanctions, but never really used as an authority to impose tariffs, and specifically to adjust tariff rates depending on each country. Then we have Section 232 duties, and these are not new, but what we've seen in this administration is an expansion of the use of this authority to not only expand the use of it, but to encompass products that we haven't seen targeted before. And then 301 is largely the Section 301 duties that were imposed against China again in 2018, and we saw a continuation of that during the Biden presidency. And I mention these is because why I mention this is because your duty rates will largely depend on which duties apply. And it's important to note that each tariff regime is separate from one another, and each has its own rules, and there's a science behind it, or they're starting to develop one where if one tariff applies, then it kicks out the other ones. And it's becoming very complex. These rules are changing often every month, and sometimes they'll have a retroactive effect. So it's important to really keep up to date on these special duties and how they're applying to different products. And this goes back to the point that I was making. There's a priority order for these tariffs. I won't discuss this in too much detail, but I mention it just because it's very nuanced and it's very complex. So it's really important that if you're entering goods into the U.S. market, that you're aware of these hierarchies and these rules, because customs is paying attention. And oftentimes what we'll see is even if you're entering goods now, there's usually a lag between when customs will do their review of entries, and you might think you're safe, but a year later you might get hit with a CF-28, which is a request for information from customs saying, hey, we noticed a few of your entries, you declared X, Y, and Z. Why? Explain the reasons. And you might have to go back and realize that you made a mistake or defend your position. So it's important to know these rules. And if you made an error, to correct them through a post-summary correction or any other method you have available. And this is just a broad overview of the reciprocal tariffs that we've seen implemented to date. As many of you know, the reciprocal tariffs currently are at 10%, and they intend to be revised on August 1st. We haven't had any strong indication from the White House on whether that's going to change for all countries, or if they're going to continue this pursuit of trying to negotiate country by country. But as it stands today, it's at 10%. for most countries. And what we have been seeing, especially in this past week or two, are these tariff letters being sent out by the White House. I will note that this is not the tariff rate yet in effect, but there's indications of, they are indications of what at least the White House thinks about tariffs as it applies to each country. And it really varies. And because the AIPA authority, which is brand new, it provides so much I don't want to say uncontrolled, but it doesn't really provide a lot of guardrails in terms of what the president can do under that authority, just because it's so brand new. We've seen President Trump utilize that authority very just to his discretion. You'll see that Brazil has a 50% duty rate, whereas Japan has a 25% one. So these are still being negotiated, and until something's definitively posted as a proclamation or in the Federal Register notice, this is just a to be determined tariff rate. We've also seen countries negotiate certain trade agreements with the White House. Although an agreement was reached with Vietnam, those details are not yet publicly available. With the UK, it's a little bit different. We did see things actually posted on the White House's website and what that framework looks like, more or less. But we should, as an exporter, you should be aware of these, especially if there's deals reached with countries that you're exporting from. That's good to know, and how that can impact your products moving forward. So going back to my initial point, I think there are some legal risks for new entrants into the U.S. market. One of them, what I see a lot, is reporting the incorrect country of origin as it relates to China. If you have a complex supply chain and you're sourcing different goods, it's important to understand and to determine what the country of origin is for that product. The legal standard for in the U.S. and I think a lot of other countries is if the good underwent a substantial transformation that's changing the character, name, or purpose of that good into something brand new. And if that happens, then you declare a new country of origin for that good. One thing to be aware of is that minor processing or minor assembly operations in a third country typically is not enough to render a good substantially transformed. What we're seeing a lot, I think, with my clients is there's a heavy emphasis right now on the transshipment of goods to avoid these new special tariffs. And what I've been seeing personally is a lot of my clients are receiving CF-28s from customs, asking about imports from Thailand, and Thailand truly being a focus to avoid a lot of the tariffs on China. So they'll transship goods from Thailand and change the country of origin. And CBP is constantly using AI and other tools monitoring shipment data from third countries to determine whether there's particular patterns like Thailand. So if they determine that Australia is importing more goods of a certain type and exporting to the United States, and that could be an indicator that there might be transshipment coming from Australia, and then they'll turn their emphasis there. So it's important to know where the risk areas are and where customs has its eye on in terms of its enforcement priorities. And with everything, I think we're in a very difficult, in a new era of enforcement in terms of customs. This administration has made it clear that customs enforcement will be a priority for this administration. There's well-documented memos on it, and it's also part of the administration's False Claims Act emphasis. And not to scare everyone, but it's something to be aware of. And in terms of compliance, it's important to exercise reasonable care that I was speaking of earlier, ensuring that what you're declaring to customs is as accurate as possible, ensuring that you're doing your diligence. And to that end, there's a lot of things that you could do that are low-hanging fruit, like making sure your HTS classification is correct. If your product doesn't have a yogurt or dairy in it, then don't declare an HTS code that applies to dairy products. So it's making sure you get it right if you can. And if you're not right, making sure you at least exercise reasonable care. Review your country of origin. There's also ways to mitigate tariffs. If you have a complex supply chain and you're importing a lot of subcomponents from China, maybe you diversify that a little bit and you can change the country of origin, consulting with your outside counsel or with your broker about other opportunities. And yeah, and also just be aware of opportunities for potential exclusions of these tariffs. We haven't seen that yet be implemented by this administration, but we're hopeful that in the future they will open up a process for exclusion of these tariffs. And also other recommendations, I would say what I'm seeing a lot is a lot of revisiting language between suppliers and importers on how to address tariff increases, whether that's a cost sharing mechanism. So I would start to think about that if you're going to export to the US market, that importers have that in mind. So be ready to be upfront with that and be ready to negotiate those contractual provisions. Also training, I think, is low-hanging fruit for any company. If you have if you're exporting or importing, making sure that your employees are trained up on these tariffs. It's a good way to show that you're exercising reasonable care. And the last thing that I would say is if you have manuals or any internal documentation to show customs that that you have the internal controls or that you care about customs compliance is also something good to have. So I'll stop there and open it up to questions.
Amazing. Thank you, Mario. There's actually a question in the chat for you, if you don't mind jumping in. If you can stop sharing your slides as well, we'll get all our beautiful faces back. Get us all on the screen. There we go. I do realize we've probably gone a couple of minutes over, and potentially you're all feeling hugely overwhelmed right now with all of this information that has just been fire hydrant hosed at you. But the great news is you've got some experts on the call to help you. So with the follow-up, we'll be sharing the contact details of everyone on the call, and everyone is more than happy to answer your questions and follow up with you individually if you have some particular details that you want to cover off. I know we covered a lot, but hopefully you learned something, you got some aha moments, you've maybe increased your awareness, maybe not your confidence quite yet, but it's all about being better prepared and making sure that you do put your best foot forward and be as successful as you possibly can. So thank you so much to my co-hosts, Scott, Nicola, and Mario, absolute legends as usual and experts in their field. And to everyone on the call, I hope you have a great rest of your day or evening, depending on where you are. Cool. Thank you, everyone.